They said the security was airtight. They said nothing could go wrong. But on a quiet evening in Utah, a $3 million protection plan failed, and in one of America's most controversial political voices, Charlie Kirk was gone. The official story pointed to one man, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, a troubled young suspect accused of murder, treason, and hate. But as investigators dig deeper, a chilling pattern begins to emerge: missing files, sealed court records, and a private security firm that vanished overnight. Our investigation uncovers what may be one of the most stunning breakdowns in modern security history. Who was really pulling the strings behind the $3 million contract? How did a suspect with no known access to high-grade weapons end up at the center of a national scandal? Was Tyler Robinson the shooter, or was he the decoy in a plan built to distract, protect, and silence? Tonight, we follow the money, the cover-ups, and the unanswered questions that still haunt the case. This isn't about politics, it's about power, about a system where truth costs millions, and silence costs a life. Before we dive into this story, remember, this is Detective Kate. True Crime, a channel that stands for justice and giving every case the attention it deserves. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss any of our investigations. And don't forget, share your thoughts and theories below. Every clue counts. Charlie Kirk had long been a lightning rod for political controversy. Outspoken, fearless, and relentlessly active in his pursuit of influence on American campuses. His Truth Campus tour was meant to inspire students, to challenge narratives, and to spark debate. But that vision ended in bloodshed. According to multiple sources and confirmed records, Kirk's Utah event at Utah Valley University was backed by a staggering $3 million private security contract, one of the largest ever recorded for a non-government event of its kind. The deal was meant to guarantee complete protection, full venue surveillance, drone monitoring, digital threat detection, and layered on-site security presence. Every entry point, every camera feed, every guard was part of a system designed to be fail-proof. Yet on that evening, the system failed, spectacularly. An alleged lone shooter, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, somehow managed to gain rooftop access directly above the main auditorium, where Kirk was scheduled to speak. It was a blind spot that should not have existed under a multi-million-dollar protection plan. According to internal keycard logs, later reviewed by investigators, a maintenance door to that roof was accessed less than 2 hours before the shooting, but the cardholder was never identified. The access didn't match any university employee, law enforcement officer, or member of Kirk's private security team. That anomaly was never explained. In the hours that followed, surveillance footage from 2 cameras near the west roofline suddenly went offline, both within the same 20-minute window. No official explanation has been offered. No footage was ever recovered. What happened next turned a university speaking tour into a national tragedy. Witnesses reported a single gunshot, sharp, echoing, and followed by chaos. Emergency teams rushed the scene, but the attacker had vanished. And within hours, law enforcement named their suspect, Tyler Robinson, a young man from a small town in Idaho, accused of carrying out an impossible act under impossible circumstances. So the question remains, how does a 22-year-old, with no known access to high-grade weaponry, no record of tactical training, and no verified entry credentials, outmaneuver a $3 million security network designed to prevent exactly this kind of breach? Was it a catastrophic failure of planning, or something far more deliberate? Please make sure you comment while listening to this update. Give us your feedback, and we'll make sure we respond to everything. That's a proof that we are fighting for justice and what is right. Tyler Robinson, 22 years old, no criminal record, no military training, and no public history of violence. To most of those who knew him, he was quiet, withdrawn, perhaps a little obsessed with politics, but far from the kind of man capable of executing a high-profile assassination. Within hours of Charlie Kirk's death, Robinson's name was everywhere. Police claimed they had their man. They pointed to a towel wrapped around the alleged murder weapon, with traces of Robinson's DNA. They cited text messages, fragments of what they called a confession, sent through a private chat app the night of the attack. But the more investigators presented, the more inconsistencies appeared. Digital forensics specialists, who later reviewed the case, noted that the metadata attached to those chat logs didn't match Robinson's known devices. Timestamps were out of sync, and several messages had been modified or duplicated. Signs, they said, of potential tampering. Yet those findings never made it into the official report. Then there were the surveillance gaps. No camera ever captured Robinson entering the university that day. No verified footage placed him near the auditorium roof. And when questioned about his whereabouts, he maintained that he had left the campus hours before the shooting, a claim partially supported by cell tower data that placed his phone several miles away when the gun went off. Despite those discrepancies, the narrative hardened. Robinson became the perfect suspect, young, isolated, and politically outspoken online. He fit the story the public was ready to believe. Within 48 hours, his mugshot replaced questions with certainty. Headlines declared the case solved before the investigation had truly begun. Yet behind the scenes, leaks told a different story. Sources close to the security team described strange movements in the hours before the shooting, unmarked vehicles, unfamiliar faces, near restricted access points, and communications between federal and private contractors that were abruptly encrypted and wiped after the attack. Even more disturbing were whispers that Robinson's name appeared in the event's internal clearance database days before the rally, not as a threat, but as a temporary vendor under a subcontractor tied to the same $3 million security deal. If true, that would mean the accused gunman wasn't an intruder at all, but someone with authorized access. So who was Tyler Robinson? A radicalized loner driven by ideology, or an unwitting pawn placed in the right spot at the right time to take the fall? Until the sealed documents are released, the truth remains buried. But one thing is certain, the official story no longer fits the evidence. When stories start falling apart, investigators know one rule: follow the money. And in this case, that trail leads into a web of contracts, private accounts, and unanswered questions. The $3 million assigned for Charlie Kirk's security wasn't small change. It was meant to cover every inch of safety, on-site protection, surveillance, digital monitoring, and crowd control. But when financial analysts began tracing where those funds actually went, what surfaced wasn't protection, it was confusion. The main event contractor listed several partner security firms, yet half of them had no digital footprint, no staff records, no verified offices, not even a phone number that worked. Payments were made to newly formed entities, some registered only weeks before the event. Others were connected to accounts that closed immediately after the shooting. According to internal memos, large portions of the budget, nearly a third, were redirected under vague expense labels like logistical maintenance and external coordination support. What that means, no one can say. The companies involved refused interviews, citing confidentiality agreements. What's even harder to explain is how a multi-million-dollar security network failed so completely. Entry logs went missing. Surveillance feeds cut out. Half the personnel listed on the duty roster never checked in that night, yet their hours were billed and paid in full. And then came the part that baffled even local investigators. Less than 24 hours after the incident, construction crews appeared outside the venue, tearing up soil and resurfacing the grounds. Officials later called it routine maintenance, but sources close to the investigation described it as premature, even suspicious. It raised one chilling question: was this just gross mismanagement, or was someone cleaning up more than just a scene? The money trail suggests more than a failure. It suggests orchestration. Funds moved, records vanished, oversight blurred, and somewhere in that chaos, between the bank transfers and the missing footage, lies the real story, the one no one wants to touch. Because if even a fraction of that $3 million went towards silence instead of security, then this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a transaction. In the days following the shooting, official statements promised transparency. Press conferences were held, reports were drafted, and investigators claimed the case was moving swiftly. But as the dust settled, the gaps grew wider, and the questions sharper. Behind closed doors, multiple agencies were tasked with piecing together what happened. Yet coordination between them was fragmented from the start. One department handled forensics, Another took over surveillance recovery, while private contractors retained portions of the original security data. Critical information was lost in the shuffle, or locked behind restricted access classifications. When the official case summary was finally released, key sections were redacted, pages missing, timestamps blurred, communications withheld under ongoing review. Even the ballistic report, the single piece of evidence meant to connect the shooter to the weapon, was partially censored, its conclusions labeled inconclusive due to data irregularities. Sources familiar with the internal process described tension between local authorities and private investigators brought in by the event sponsors. Each side pointed fingers, each claimed the other was withholding evidence. And somewhere in the middle, the truth seemed to disappear. Witnesses came forward, but their stories conflicted. Some recalled seeing additional personnel moving through restricted areas minutes before the shooting. Others mentioned hearing multiple gunshots, not one. When questioned later, several witnesses retracted their statements, saying they felt pressured to stay consistent with the official timeline. Meanwhile, documents obtained through public inquiry showed that multiple digital files, including drone footage and building access logs, were deleted from shared databases within 48 hours of the incident. No explanation was ever given. By week 2, what began as a murder investigation had turned into a struggle over jurisdiction and credibility. Evidence went missing, leads went cold, and still officials assured the public that everything was under control. But if you spoke to those inside the investigation, the analysts, the tech specialists, the officers who handled the first reports, they tell a different story. A story of confusion, interference, and quiet warnings not to dig too deep. And that's when a new theory began to surface. What if the investigation wasn't failing by accident? What if it was designed to fail from the start? Because when accountability gets blurred, when records vanish, and when truth becomes classified, someone, somewhere, is controlling the narrative. And if that's the case, then the question isn't just who pulled the trigger, it's who made sure we'd never know for certain. Across the nation, grief turned to outrage, and outrage into division. What began as vigils for Charlie Kirk soon evolved into protests, press conferences, and political theater. Streets filled with signs demanding justice, while online communities erupted in speculation and blame. Supporters of Kirk's movement accused investigators of burying the truth. They called for transparency, for the release of full surveillance footage, for accountability at every level. Meanwhile, critics claimed the outrage was being weaponized, that the tragedy had been transformed into a political spectacle, where every headline served a narrative rather than a fact. But beneath the noise and the fury, the human cost was still raw. A family torn apart, a wife standing before cameras, trembling, asking not for vengeance, but for clarity. Her voice, breaking through the static of national debate, carried a pain deeper than politics. And somewhere beyond the speeches and hashtags, the questions refused to fade. How could a $3 million security contract fail so catastrophically? Why were records sealed, files redacted, evidence lost? And most of all, if money, power, and privilege couldn't prevent one man's death, what hope does the average citizen have when truth itself becomes negotiable? Investigators continue to promise updates. Politicians continue to promise reform. Yet the case sits, suspended between conclusion and confusion, an unfinished story in a nation too divided to agree on what justice even means anymore. Because at its core, this wasn't just the failure of a system, it was the failure of trust, the fragile belief that those sworn to protect us will tell the truth when it matters most. And if $3 million in protection couldn't save one man, what does that say about accountability? In the end, the story of Charlie Kirk's death isn't just about a man lost, a suspect accused, or a case unresolved. It's about what happens when truth becomes fragmented, when facts are filtered, files are sealed, and accountability becomes a matter of convenience. Some call it incompetence, others, corruption. But for those who were there, the guards, the staff, the families left behind, it feels like something deeper, a betrayal. Because somewhere in the chain of command, between the contracts, the cover sheets, and the closed-door briefings, someone made a choice to look away, to stay silent, or to protect their own interests. And every silence, every omission, brought this case further from justice. Today, the official report remains incomplete. The accused sits behind bars, awaiting a trial that keeps being delayed. the footage still missing, the money unaccounted for, and the truth buried under redacted lines and forgotten headlines. But even in that silence, the questions linger. Who failed? Who lied? Who stood guard while justice was quietly erased? Because sometimes betrayal doesn't pull the trigger, it stands beside.